I had attended another Job Corps center in Sierra Nevada between the years of 1986 and 1987. I joined this one on my own to get away from my sister and my mother. These were during the time of when my mother was waiting for her money from an inheritance of $1,700,000 from my uncle Mirren Harper. I told my mother that I was going away for school in Reno, Nevada. I was going to stay on center in Job Corps and then go from there. I did not want to have anything to do with my mother's money. I was determined to not be seduced into a lifestyle that I knew would not last, nor would be good for my spirit. I was before forced to go back to Chicago through the influence of my sister to my mother. The both of them were no good back in those times. I was working at a McDonald's out in El Camino, California, which is a part of San Francisco. My sister knew that my mother was getting ready to get her money, and she wanted me to be no part of it. Money changes people for the worse sometimes. When my papers came through for Reno, I left for Job Corps again. After 9 months in Job Corps, I had made plans to move here to Las Vegas. I told my mother 6 months before I left Job Corps that it was time for me to live my life away from the family and to try and start my own family. She understood. So she told me, once I left Job Corps, I had to return back home to wait for a check that is given to us called our readjustment check. I had explained to my mother that I had to return back home to get it, because at that time I did not have an address in Reno for the system to send it to. Once I returned home, my mother told me that she was broke and that she was getting ready to lose her home. I told her that I understood what she meant and what she was going through, but my mind was set on getting my life started. She told me that she was going to sell her house and take the money from that and invest it in something. The very next morning, I was awakened out of my sleep and was told to get out of her house. My things were being thrown out in the street like it was trash. I was standing there in the living room in my underwear, trying to reason with her of why all of a sudden I was told to leave. All of this did, right in front of my nephews. She told me that if I did not care about her problems, then she did not care about mine. I am the type of man who does not look for anyone to care about my problems. To my understanding, that is human realistic. If they are my problems, why should I look for you to care about them? They are mine, and God will solve my problems due to my surrendering the problem to Him. Once this has been done, what is looked upon as your problem is no longer your problem. It is diminished down to a problem. It belongs to God, who has no problem because nothing is so great in opposition to the degree that it poses such a force that it is looked upon by the unlimited intellect of God, the Almighty, as a problem. To say that something is a problem to God is to assert that God is intimidated or limited in wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, or to assert that God does not understand the circumstance and how to approach it, if not solve it at all. It is to assert that it has power and mystery to His divine and unlimited intellect, an inner meaning so deep to shake God or to force God to think, when God does not have to think, because He is the author of all wisdom, knowledge, and truth. Thus does the Great Spirit, God, not have a mind. A mind is an intellect in which has a beginning and an end. It is an intellect that is limited regarding the personal destiny of man and woman, ordained by God. How can a God so great, who has created the heavens and the earth and all in which is created, have a problem in what He Himself created? God is not a scientist. A scientist studies that what has been created. God is He who creates that what has been created. God is the creator in which brings that what is created into creation. Praise God, John 1 verse 3. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. Therefore, in truth, we have no problems as long as God is with us. As I was being thrown out, my sister was in support of her. My mother even picked up something to hit me with in trying to force me to leave immediately. I told her that I would leave, But I was not going to leave in my underwear. I got my things and I left. In the process, I had lost my readjustment check. I walked up to a payphone to try and call the Job Corps Center in San Francisco to talk to them about what just had transpired and that I needed another check so that I could survive. But the office was closed for the holidays. It was the coming Christmas holidays. I went back home. My sister was talking to me through the den window. I was asking her of what happened and what brought this on. She claimed to not know. I find it always hard to believe her. It has been a consistent history that whenever I am around those two, something bad happens. They had got up that morning and left together, and then when they returned, I was being thrown out in the street. I asked my mother to let me back inside to talk to her, and she refused. While inside, I was telling her that I just wanted to start my own life in Las Vegas. She did not care. I decided to go to San Francisco to see if I could get another check. I knew that I would never get there by any other means than walking. I knew no other way to get there other than the highway on 95 to San Francisco. I went into my things that were thrown out into the street. My leather carrying bag, some warm cloths, and things for personal hygiene, and I made up my mind to walk from San Rafael, California to San Francisco, California. I began to walk down the sidewalk and I spoke to God. Suddenly I knew that this was something that God had for me to go through for a reason. I suddenly and strangely felt a sense of peace. I felt free from the evil surrounding vices of my earthly family. I thought that it was a shame that a person could go through so much with their people, that homelessness would serve as a symptom of peace to them. That sense of peace served, I would come to understand later, was an end to a part of my life, and the beginning of another part of it. I told God as I made up my mind to walk, God, I know that I'm getting ready to go through something very trying, but I know that you are with me. I ask you to walk with me and protect me. We walked to the Highway 95 and headed towards San Francisco, California. As we were walking on the freeway, I was numb on the inside. I had no true idea of why I was walking there. I could have stayed in San Rafael somewhere and made it until I left. But God was the one whom told my mind to walk to San Francisco, because when we are vexed, shocked of a reality, we immediately become numb. We kind of internally shut down in the fear sense, and we need God to instruct us on what we should do, so that we do not make irrational or illogical decisions. Then the message comes to deal with the issue, and we submit to it until we are able to understand just what God is doing with us in this experience. At first, we do not know because it is a new experience. It was cold and raining. There were cars and trucks blowing their horns at me. During my walk, I was stopped by some police officers that asked me of why I was walking on the 95. I told them of my problem and that I was walking to San Francisco, and they told me that maybe I should go back and work things out. But I knew inside so convincingly that it was not possible to settle anything with my mother, because she was too consumed with evil. They told me that if I stayed on the freeway, I would never make it to San Francisco alive. God told me inside that very moment that I would make it. It was as if the moment the officer was saying that, God was saying to me that I would make it. That is what I heard. I kept walking with God. We walked until nighttime. I could not believe what was happening to me. Yet I was not surprised because of who I was dealing with. So I guess I did believe that this was happening. I guess that I was in a state of shock and not shocked at all. Thus it seemed to be the norm because of every time I come close to those two demons, something bad always happens to me. Then the humble sense of numbness intervened. Then did my mind reflected upon my life up until that moment. I went to Job Corps to get out of their way in what they wanted to do with her money. I met someone who I loved and wanted to move to Vegas to start a family with her. I did all of what I set out to do and I was paying for it. Why, I asked God. It was too early for God to answer me. I had to go through some things first, and he had to speak to my mind through those experiences regarding the wisdom that would be imbued within them. And also I had to be at a state of being mentally, emotionally, and spiritually for I to truly receive the revelation from God in understanding. There were convictions cultivating within me in terms of family, each step that I took. After about 13 hours of walking, I came upon the Golden Gate Bridge. I began to walk across it. I walked the bridge and then the spirit of Satan visited me in my sorrow. I walked until I reached the halfway, and then I stopped. It was night, thus it was dark. It was lonely, it was cold. It was raining. It was windy, and I was on a famous bridge looking down at the ocean, which was dark. I could only see the waves that were moving, that the moonlight was shining on. I was struck with the spirit of hopelessness in which Satan was using to try and destroy me with unsettling thoughts and feelings. As I looked down at the ocean, I could hear Satan speaking the words of my earthly father. You ain't worth $15, and no one gives a damn about you. Satan's translation was, why don't you jump and end it? Satan used the hurt of my mother's words. Get the hell out of my house. I don't give a damn about you if you don't care about my problems. I stood there, and the thought of suicide came over my mind. I could hear Satan trying to convince me to jump into the ocean and kill myself. I noticed the language of the wind, and I never heard a wind that was so empty and lonely. There was no sound of the city, just an evil wind beating slightly up against my ears mine. In it just speaking to me in this way, blocking out all other sounds to inflict loneliness and hopelessness, trying to convince me that God had abandoned me and that I was all alone with the principles pertaining to ending my life, and there were no angels that would come for me. This particular evil rhythm of wind wanted me to destroy myself. It wanted me to feel as if my entire life on this earth was leading to this sick and satanic position regarding destiny. I was overcome with grief and fear, and I felt betrayed. I started to cry out loud. My hands clenched onto the bridge railing. My flesh wanted to jump. It was my sorrow in which was ruling my carnal intellect, feeding on the evil of the words of my so-called family. The Spirit of God was the spirit in which was having me to hold on to that railing. I let out a great scream and cry, and then I exhaled with tears running down my face mixed with the cold rain. I just stood there until it was safe for me to let go. What I mean by this is that the spirit of Satan had overcame my rationality, because he attacked me at a time to where my own rationality was leaning more so in harmony with his. Thus I helped give him power over my mind. I felt the Spirit of God causing me to grip upon the railing. And as I was brought to a state of calmness in which told me it was okay to let go, I did, and I continued to walk across the bridge again with God. Once we made it across the bridge, I noticed that after so very many years, my feet had began to pain me again because of the 13-hour walk. Satan was trying to take everything from me, including the reality that God had healed my feet. I stopped at a payphone to call my mother. I practically begged her to let me back in the house. I thought of the forest. It was raining, it was cold and windy, but this time there was no one but I. I told her that my feet were hurting. She told me with the coldest voice that I have ever heard from her. She said, "Stop walking then." She told me to stop walking. When God that day told me to walk, in her spirit she meant stand still and die. She hung up. I looked at the city ahead of me, and God said again, "Walk." I began to walk along with God. I made it downtown by the early morning time, but when it was still dark, I went and sat at the Greyhound bus station. There were others there who were homeless. I sat there and could not believe what was happening. I learned of what the feeling of numbness was. I was wondering of why I was not shedding any tears. I felt so empty, and it had seemed as if the coldness of the weather had absorbed into my personality. So what I learned of numbness was that it is not a feeling at all, but yet a feeling to be recognized as numbness. It is a feeling that is void of common, everyday feelings in which we feel every day. All of your internal commonality shuts down, and you begin to shed inwardly. You just want to go further and further inside of yourself, and to some objective, save what is left of what is still sane of your peace of mind. That part of your inner self that you really never become with until a trying circumstances inflict our spiritual, intellectual stability. That part of yourself in which you feel the inflictor did not penetrate with his persecution of evil. An inner refuge, a paradise for the reclusive soul to heal and to rest the common spirit. To survive, I had to resort to stealing in order to eat. I would go into stores and take giant-sized Snicker bars and would eat one half in the morning and the last half in the evening. I thought of my granddad and how upset he was when he was told of how I stole some brownies in Chicago in order for I to eat after Gram had passed, while my mother was too busy taking care of her boyfriend Harold. I was, to my understanding, demoting what he taught me through his being upset at me stealing to eat. And there I was again stealing because of the same person. I went for some days without anything to eat and was taught the difference between hunger and starvation. I was on the street for 3 weeks and did not get 1 hour of sleep. Many find that hard to believe, but when you are on the street, if you tend to fall asleep, there is a good chance that you would not be waking up because of the desperation of those who are trying to just survive and live. When you are a new face in the crowd, the face of the stranger stands out. Thus you become a target, and you tend to intensify the desperation of others, unintentionally considering their curiosity of what you may possess materialistically. I met a lot of very intelligent people on the street. I had noticed that during the daytime, we were just looking for ways to survive, but during the evening hours, we would sometimes huddle and talk. I have a friend who lives in San Francisco by the name of Linda Price, who was a good friend to my uncle, who left that wench his money. The first day on the street, I tried to find her home out there. I walked up so many streets that looked familiar to me, but I never found her home. It was strange considering of how many times I had gone to visit her. I suddenly could not find her home. It was as God took the common knowledge out of my mind and did not want me to seek Linda as a refuge. He wanted me to experience something. Once I had given up finding her home, I began to walk towards the downtown area again. As I was walking, my mind began to reflect upon my miserable lot. I suddenly was overcome with inner grief and began to cry out to God. Oh God, why is this happening to me? Suddenly I could feel God tell me to humble myself and that everything was going to work out. I took a deep breath and continued to walk again with God. I was in a state that I had not grown up in, and the person who I did know, I was not able to find. No money, no shelter, and no food to eat. Nothing but the cloths on my bag of a few things, and God watching over me. One day as I was just standing looking at the people walking downtown, I caught the attention of a very pretty woman who was talking to 2 other men. She was mixed, as one would say. She walked up to me and gave me $1. The 2 men were looking at her as she started to talk to me. "Are you okay?" she asked me, and I could not answer her because I was in so much pain inside. I seemed to be internally gagged. Her question had seemed to sting my mind and heart. My eyes began to tear, and tears were streaming down my face. It was since my trial my first release, but this release was a strange one. I was in so much of a shock, yet numb related pain as the tears shed. I felt no emotional grief grasp me. It was though the tears on their own pushed their way out of my eyes as one in a desperate escape to freedom and ran down my face on their own. An inner pain so great that one is no longer able to feel anything, not even the common internal grief. The tears were as a living vessel with their own objective intellect, as if they were trying to force me to accept another element of my new and trying reality. "I hope you understand me," she told me as she pointed her finger at me. piercing her hazel eyes. "You are a very beautiful man, and you are going to make it." I told her that I have never been through anything like this. She asked me if I tried to go to any of the shelters out here. I told her that I have never been to those kinds of places, and that I did not want to get used to being in there. I internally refused to place myself in the ditch of becoming a part of a situation in which I became too comfortable, and would have eventually cultivated, in the process of diminishing because of a wrong choice, into a lifestyle in which was never meant for my existence. I had to stay focused on who and what I was and not allow a circumstance mold me into what I had seen walking on those desolate streets as I saw other brothers and sisters become. She told me again as she hugged me real tight, slightly rocking me, expressing that the hug gesture was sincere. "You are going to make it. Don't worry." She gave me about 50 more cents after I asked her, and then she smiled at me and walked back over to her friends. God had sent me one of his angels. Jay, God bless her soul wherever she is, a walk through the valley. I'm getting ready to take you into the valley with me, a place that God took me and taught me valuable lessons. We feel as if homelessness is an issue of having no place to stay in terms of shelter, a home. But it goes much deeper than that. Homelessness is internal, as God said that the Jew is one inwardly. When you have no knowledge, no internal feeling of where you will sleep that night, because you have nowhere else to go. When you have no idea of where your next meal will come from, because you have no means of buying food. Or when stress and anxiety attack your mind because of the circumstances, if you will live on those streets for the rest of your life, or will you die on those streets as an old man or woman, because the rest of the world does not care, then you know what it is to be homeless. It is mental, psychological, and emotional, a feeling of hopelessness and the thought of a slow, humiliating, lonely, and painful death in a world in which the people's hearts have waxed cold. Speaking of that, I was to find out months later. My father had said after the two of them lied about what happened, "Whatever he did, I bet he won't do it no more." So he admitted that he did not know what happened, rather what they told him was true or not. But still he, the Reverend Brayboy, sided with those who betrayed God, God's way, and me. Amazing and very Christian. To make a statement like that, and my knowing how much I suffered out there for nothing, almost made me take a trip to Chicago. I don't know what happened, but oh well, so what? I will never stop teaching people, including my own children, that people are people and not to get caught up in family. Never on any level, rather emotionally or anything else, respect is enough. And if you receive no respect, close the door on them and don't just lock it and throw away the key, but blow the door up, because as long as there is a lock, you are in danger of someone picking it with his or her lies and pushing that door back open. I only need for God to love me. It is because of God that I live and breathe. No one else. My conception was a moment of pleasure for him, and the beginning of a lifelong struggle for me. If I have tears, I will shed them for myself, not for my father. Shaka Zulu. The world is a cold place to live in, and even Jesus told us that a man's enemies would be of his own family. I have a very dear friend named Kimberly Cabral. She was a student at Stanford University. She told me one day that she and some people had participated in a homeless program in San Francisco, California. A program of where she and some other students had spent 3 days on the street to see what it was like to be homeless. They had sleeping bags and also access to bank tellers. After I told her of how a waste of time it was, I explained to her of what homelessness was. It is not an experience that can be looked upon as an experiment, because it is an inner experience with a reality in which could never be imitated nor duplicated. Not interchangeable, because the principles of those interchangeables are imbued with deceit and falsehood. Therefore, if demonstrated, you would only be demonstrating an illusion in which could never fully and truly grasp upon this most intimate reality. It is only a reality, something that you must truly experience in order to not only somewhat understand, but truly know what it means. If you can walk away from it at any given moment and go back to your home for shelter and comfort, if you can go to the bank machine and draw out money to humble the anxiety of your hunger, a hunger so dizzy, so intense that you feel and smell through your nostrils, the acids within your stomach, feeding on your inner body, because it has no more food left to digest, and then it gets worse. You begin the process of starving to death. No matter of how hungry you were, you lose your appetite completely. And then you start to believe that you can go another 2 or more days without food. Thus, it begins to feed on itself and the process of wasting away begins. Then you can never truly know and realize what homelessness is about, what it means in truth. It takes far more than 3 days to know what this means. Those who are homeless have not the knowledge, thus the resources to place them in the mental position, the mindset to make those choices, those decisions, because they have nothing in arm reach or in the mental arms reach to rescue them from their lot. They have nothing to decide on, no refugio, no paradise, no one to love them and no one to care. You feel as though the entire world has turned its back on you, only in time to realize that you too had your back turned when you also were within the heathen's flock of everyday living activities, everyday greed, every day existing in a sense of spiritual and mental death, not being able to truly see, feel, thus act upon righteous principle, made over again internally by an unseen hand in which rules their hearts and minds subliminally through an American corporate system of ambition, greed, and spiritual murder, but a society that has been exposed as satanic in its false description of common morality. In a dark time, the eye begins to see. No one wants to talk to you most of the time. You are made to feel as if you are a disease, and so one begins to talk to themselves to rationalize their own internal reality. The enemy attacks the mind. You are influenced, forced by stress, the mental condition, to cultivate a system of deceptive intelligence to create an internal sense of self-communication, an ill-spirited doctrine in which you, after being influenced by the enemy regarding the circumstances, see fit for you to inwardly justify your leaving your own common rationality, your common sense of reality toward your path to giving up on God and yourself. As Brother Peter, you begin to fall into the raging sea below. Below, meaning a lower level of consciousness in which serves as no source of refuge in your reaching the reality of God. No faith. You look at the world and how very cold-hearted it is, and you ask yourself, was that me? Was I as this when I was in their position? A position that is looked upon as okay or having yourself together? Was I this careless, arrogant, non-feeling, and cruel? It was as a cloak was taken off of the head of common society, and I saw this insidious, wicked world for what it is at its worst, in its lack of compassion towards the least of those whom God tells us is truly Him. Matthew 25, verse 41 through 46. The phantom was revealed to me, and I also saw my face. It told me to never take anything for granted again, not even peeling ripe off of an orange. Homelessness is a humbling circumstance, and you become in touch with yourself in many aspects regarding what is truly inside of you and the magnitude of your will in order to survive and live. Brother David, you experience circumstances humbling you to beg for what you would never have the nerve to beg for, because you never had to. So, it is either a revolutionary change in personality because of the circumstances, or it is an issue of exposure, cultivation, and manifestation into what has always been internally present. It just took the right trial to reveal it to you. I was 22 at the time, and I never in my life had to beg anyone for money. But I was on the street asking people for just a few cents for me to eat, if I was not stealing to eat. At first, it is a humiliating act, But when your flesh strongly dictates that it must eat or drink, or it will die and you will die with it, you submit 100% in order to live for another day. And the feeling of humiliation and embarrassment diminishes because what you never thought was there, the comfort zone, the ego, the pride, has been broken, and life itself becomes most vital to you, and a new reality has been presented to you upon a golden plate. Thus you develop and obtain almost an animalistic sense of survival, as a starving, trusting stray dog coming up to a stranger holding a piece of meat to eat. Thus you develop a new sense of encouragement from God, and the sun inside you begins to rise. This state of existence could be damaging if this state of growth is not properly understood as growth and not degeneration. With moral discipline in keeping in touch with your true essence, which is God, meaning to not allow this circumstance to influence you through your hunger, your anxiety, your desperation, to invoke criminalistic thoughts and actions upon a society that you may feel deserving, because of their hypocritical stand upon humanity, in which strips them from being human beings of civil conduct, towards the less fortunate due to their disobedience to the living God. You learn that the world in which you lived in previously was not one of civilization, but a dead lie, professing the face of a living humanity. You tend to ask for much less than what you truly need from others, because you suddenly realize how cold and greedy the world is, and you do not want to ask for too much, because you know you would be rejected and mocked. Thus, asking for a little over nothing at all could cause continued starvation on you from this ill-companioned society. So in this, there is a fear factor in your careful approach, as well as the state of insecurity, because of the coldness, crudeness of this world. But just how much does one whom is without shelter need? The world asserts in their betrayal of common morality. You suddenly understand of how the world is driven with a petty greed for the homeless, in which is very small to the common human being with shelter, but is very coarse to the living God. I am speaking of a form of petty greed, that of which if you ask for nothing more than a quarter for a cup of coffee, for its caffeine or a piece of candy, for its sugar, you are rejected and mocked because of your present outward condition. Suddenly, a quarter to this society carry far more value than it was to anyone else, if someone else in his or her condition would have asked for that same quarter. Even though the American dollar has been losing its value since the year 1953, thanks to World War I. Thus, this tells you the petty value of a quarter. It only has true value to one who has nothing. What is going on in the American economy? This level of existence is looked upon by this Christian, this Baptist society as a form of insanity, when this same so-called Christian and Baptist society knows by the words of Jesus that it is better to give than to receive. They say it because it sounds good to those whom surround them. It makes them look and sound righteous with an aura of divine innocence, so pretty to quote the book in its prophetic flavor and demeanor. But within their hearts lie the intense hate of the evil one. But how often does these words manifest into deeds regarding the truth of the Word of God? This Christian-founded country is at an assassination, which is called a war upon the Muslim world and its people. Matthew 5 verse 9, Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Ephesians 5 verse 18 and 19. And be not drunk with wine, wherein is excess, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to yourselves in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your hearts to the Lord. So very easy and pretty to say, to quote the Christian dialogue, the script from boastful memorization. But the hypocrites find it hard to do, if they do it at all. This premeditated, fake, phased of so-called holy communication, lacking the Spirit of God. The worst hypocrites are those who profess nothing but lip service, but no deeds, because their hearts are far away from God. even though they profess the word of God with their lips. It is what is within the heart, in which produces movement of righteousness from the principles of what is right in the sight of God, not what is said from the mouth. If you give without an inner greedy strength, thinking of yourself, then you are not giving in spirit, in love, in honesty, in freedom. The word tells you to be a cheerful giver, meaning to be happy that God placed you in the position to give to the least. To Him, the only thing that saved my life was the Word of God. One morning I was sitting at the bus station reflecting on the cause of my condition, and I caught myself mentally floating away because I had started not to think of anything anymore because of not having any sleep. Instead of focusing on what needed to be done about the condition, I focused too much emotionally and psychologically on the effects of the lot. As being in a tunnel with no light at its end, I was locked within a blind stare and was beginning to die truly. I suddenly shook my head to snap out of it, and I started to read my Bible. When you allow yourself to float away, then the evil effects of the condition has consumed you and Satan has won in the trial. I began to read the book of Psalm, and I felt a peace come over me regardless of my circumstances. I read Psalm 22 and others, and I never read them so honestly as if I knew that God was hearing my cry to Him. I realized what honest prayer was, and I realized that my spirit tapped into the spirit of David. I understood his pain and level of sincerity in his cry to God. It was God's word in which kept me sane and free from internal dismay and destruction. The word of God gave me strength and an open focus to receive more of what God had to teach me. I was homeless only in the physical sense, God was explaining to me, because the inner peace in which He allowed me to feel in the midst of the circumstances gave me a peace that I never felt before, as when Jesus calmly walked upon the water while in the midst of a storm. Even within the midst of a warm home, I was free. Homeless, yet not homeless within, free from the stress of the effects of homelessness. The word Spirit of God did this to my spirit, my very soul. When we are in troubled times in our dismay, we need not food, not shelter, but we need a word that will penetrate all the way down to the very core of our being. And then as the core leavened, revived, and common flesh-related voids are filled with truth, with power. But the only way that we will achieve this is to stay in the Word of God, because what sits upon the core and which buries it is the garbage and the filth of this world, meaning the evil that we do to one another, in which causes us to be not holy as the Lord God expects of us, but heathens mentally hell-bound by the mentality, thus will of Satan, Matthew 4 verse 4. But he answered and said, It is written, Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. This is why Jesus tells his servants to go to those who are lost, because he knows that his word will give them peace. It is as the storm that was shaking the ship that the disciples were on, and they saw that Jesus was sleeping, or when they were caught in a storm in the sea, and Peter saw Jesus walking in humbleness in the midst of the stormy, raging sea. He asked Peter to take his hand, and as long as Peter had faith in Jesus and the power that he had within, he was able to walk on the sea to him. But as soon as he allowed the circumstances to get the best of his mind, hobbling his emotions and affecting his faith, he began to fall. But Jesus reached out to him with love and compassion, caught him and saved his life. He did the same for me on the Golden Gate Bridge and in the entire experience. I know him. I was once Peter. As time went on, I met some strange people. There was a bus driver who tried to pick me up. I met a young man who had just escaped from a mental institution with an intelligence that was amazing. And I saw how cruel some security guards could be to the homeless people. They harassed us all at times. I had a cross that my mother gave me for Christmas that I tried to sell, but God would not allow me to go there. So he moved upon the hearts of the people whom I tried to sell it to for food. They refused. One morning I walked into a Catholic church on a street called Market Street. I walked in and sat down. I remember staring up at the statues of Mary and Jesus. I remember that my thoughts, my emotions were flowing with plead and questions of why I was going through this. I suddenly heard a voice in my mind. I know it was God, that they cannot hear you. They are nothing but statues, molded by the hands of men. It was God's way of telling me that He was with me and inside of me, and regardless of what I was going through and its pain, God had not abandoned me. I looked at the other people who were not in my position and wished that I were in their position, not knowing who or what they were or what was going on in their hearts. I, at that time, failed to realize that I was in the greatest position that I could ever be in my life, because God was teaching me through a trial. When the holidays were over, I managed to get in touch with a woman who worked for Job Corps. She told me that my readjustment check was found and was sent back to them, and that I had to go to the office in San Francisco to get some bus fare to go to get it. At first, it was supposed to be sent to the office in San Francisco, but the girl who was the secretary was dragging her feet, so I ended up having to wait another 2 days on the street. I told her that I could go and get it myself. I had to go to Oakland, California. Once I got my check, I cashed it and went to Wendy's and got me about 3 double burgers and some fries. You should have seen how everybody was looking at how much food I was eating. The ferry boat. This is of the same experience, but the ferry boat has a significant meaning to it. Once I made it back to San Francisco, I knew that I would not make it out there. I only had $335 to my name, and I knew that I had to use it wisely, and I knew that the wisdom of the value of this money lied in the decision that I make in where to go with this money. I got on the ferry boat that took you from San Francisco to San Rafael, California, to get the rest of my things that were still outside, drenched from the rain. As the boat slowly moved to the open ocean, I stood at the edge of the boat at the gate and looked upon the ocean and the Golden Gate Bridge in the distance. I was again on the same ocean that I was thinking of giving my life, my body to. I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the ocean. I smelled the freshness of its massive belly, and as I opened my eyes and looked at the ocean with my own eyes this time and not the eyes of the enemy, I saw something else. I saw life, not with hurt and anguish. I smiled and I felt a peace within as I smiled, and I heard God tell me in my inner spirit, everything is going to work out. That moment, I was not as Brother Peter. This time, I was above the ocean and walking upon the water, a higher understanding in which foundation was based upon faith and truth. I was with the living again, and not wanting to join in with the dead in the sea of sin and corruption. As I said before, I was cultivating very deep convictions about the family principle. I had learned that no matter who anyone is to you, rather they be mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, whatever that case may be, people are just people, no matter what they say they are to you. All that it takes is the right circumstances to squeeze them enough, and they will end up being people, strangers in terms of their evil, their thinking and their actions, and the very depths of how far they will go. They tend to be strangers because we were brought up to believe in this family lie and the love that is supposed to be attached to it. There I learned that there is no special deep-rooted family-related love inside of no one who says that they are family. No special or unique love that exists in which surpasses circumstances, in which intercepts the evil within one when they seek to hurt another inside of their bloodline. If there is, it is only revealed in the event of someone's death, and even that is rooted in hypocrisy. I chose to stand upon that truth in my approach and understanding of the dilemma. I say humbly with assurance, God, the eternal Father, the creator of the heavens and the earth, the creator and ruler of all existence, never left me. God stayed with me as I asked when everyone else threw me away. God is the beneficent, the most merciful. I know that God is real. God is love. By the mercy, the grace of God, I was delivered and liberated from an experience in which this day I would not trade for anything in this earth. That same day, I left for Reno, Nevada after taking the ferry back from San Rafael back over to San Francisco with only $335 in my pocket. But by the grace of God, He delivered me and I made it because God made me. Psalm 40, 1 and 2. I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined unto me and heard my cry. He brought me up also out of a horrible pit, out of the miry clay, and set my feet upon a rock and established my goings. David Anthony Brayboy.